Welcome back to the Ross and Jono show. Ross, if it's okay with you, I'd like to recap to bring everybody up to speed with where we're about to go to today. Over the last few weeks, we discussed the actions of Moses Shapira having been emboldened by Frederick Bleek's book, Introduction to the Old Testament. In reading that, he realized that the document that he had was perhaps an Elohist document, perhaps very, very old, and he was certainly emboldened to take it out of the Jerusalem bank vault that it had been sitting there for 5 years. And retrieving it from that bank vault, he showed it to Schroeder, Dr. Schroeder, who was an expert in Paleo-Hebrew. And Schroeder gave his expert opinion and certainly leaned in favor of the authenticity of the document, further emboldening Shapira. Shapira then writes to Hermann Strach and an overview of the acquisition of the document and the examination of the document. All of this he writes to Strach, and without even waiting to hear from him to receive a reply, he felt so confident that he just left. Off he went to go and actually take the and as you pointed out last week, this was the last time that he would be in Jerusalem. But he takes the document with him to go and show Strach. In his mind, he's like, well, Strach has read the letter. He's tantalized. Of course he wants to see it, Ross.
Right. Why wouldn't he? Absolutely.
Why wouldn't he? Which is a question that we are often asking ourselves, but we'll get to that. So off he goes. And when he gets there, Strach rejects it, without even giving it a viewing. So questions that we're asking today is, what now? What does he do now? Does he have a plan B? What are his options? Where does he go? To whom does he turn? And we find ourselves in Leipzig. Before we get there, Ross, just off air today, we were chatting away about this, and you shared with me a quote from John Mark Allegro, and I'm wondering if we can kick off with that quote, because I think it sets the tone nicely for what's about to happen. Do you want to do that?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, this guy, I love John Marco Allegro. He is one of the most courageous scholars. He stood against other Dead Sea Scroll scholars. He's the one guy that's not in the clique. He's one of the latecomers to the team, under Father DeVoe and those guys. But he wrote in 1965, John Marco Allegro, he wrote a book called The Shapira Affair. And in this book, he kicks off chapter 1 with this quote. I'm going to read part of it. He says, biblical scholars, he's remarking on the fact that this scroll was rejected by the scholars of the day. 19th century scholarship rejected this, condemning it as a forgery. Here's Allegro. Biblical scholars could once more relax over the medieval text that they had always used, happily confident, Jono, that their theories would never be upset by really ancient manuscripts of the Bible from Palestine. None existed, none could exist. The Shapira affair was closed. And that is truly my assessment. That was in 1965, and that's what has happened, is that people love every theory about how the Bible was composed. Every academic view is built upon the Masoretic text, what John Marco Allegro calls medieval text. So we're going to talk about, and what we're talking about when we talk about the Shapira manuscripts, the Shapira fragments, is what we believe to be an ancient, authentic manuscript that comes from the caves near the Dead Sea. I'm ready, Jono.
So he arrives, Hermann Strach says, "Oh, my eyes," which is a different thing to what he wrote. Shapira never saw his reply, but a reply did return to Jerusalem, and the reply was, what was his reply exactly?
His reply of May 27th basically is, don't even bother bringing such an obvious forgery here to Berlin. Just keep it in your little knick-knack shop there, Shapira.
In your little knick-knack shop.
Like you said, he didn't even wait. He writes the letter, and he goes straight to Berlin. He shows up at Hermann Strach's office at the university, and this is where we pick up this week.
And what is his reason? for rejecting the opportunity to see it?
Yeah, after writing a bold letter about don't bring this forgery here, don't even bother with it, he says something about his eyes are bothering him.
Yeah.
He tells Shapira, my eyes are bothering me and I can't really, because again, we're gonna meet some men tonight who don't have courage, and this is strike one. Man without courage, Herman Struck, and I know people might say, he was a great scholar. He was a man without courage. Let's introduce him that way here.
Is he strike one? Because or is he example number one? I'd say perhaps he's example number two. Perhaps Schlottmann is. Yeah. Let's say Schlottmann is the first to do this without actually really examining the document, without seeing the document. He's like, I don't like it. It's different to our canonical text. Therefore, don't even. And
that's right.
And that was enough to cause, as Shapira writes in his letter to Struck, it was enough to cause him to put it away in the bank vault for 5 years. Okay.
Right. And notice the repetition. Notice the repetition of this idea. It's an obvious forgery. It's an obvious forgery. Everybody is singing from the same hymnal. And by the way, it is technically like a hymnal because those top German scholars who are rejecting this, many of them are affiliated with their particular church denomination and so forth. So he realizes that Struck is not going to look at it, so he has to move on to Station 2.
Station 2. So Station 2 exists because of a relationship that developed, and we talked about this when we discussed the interim years when the document was in the bank vault. What was he doing? What was he keeping? What was Shapira keeping himself busy with? Well, it was the solemn inscription, and that's when he struck up a relationship with Hermann Guter. So Hermann Guter becomes Station 2. Tell us about it.
That's right. Now, at this point, I want to introduce, we're going to be doing a couple of things in this episode, Jono. We're going to be talking about 1 week in Leipzig, and we're going to be talking about some behind-the-scenes information that is only now becoming available since the writing and publishing of the Moses Scroll, primarily. Others have mentioned here and there, but we really get into the letters, these German letters that I call the Leipzig Letters. But the thing that really blew it open for me is this book. This is an English translation. The English title is Fragments of a Leather Manuscript Containing Moses' Last Words to the Children of Israel. It is the only academic report published in the 19th century. Other scholars wrote about the fragments, but this is the only full-blown academic report. And the reason that I have it, and it is now available in English, is because when I was in the midst of the research, I kept reading a German title. It would say, someone would reference it and say, see, Fragment einer, Lederhandschrift, the whole German title. And Dave and Patty Tyler, part of their business, they have a translation segment where they do all sorts of translations for various things all around the world. And they asked me, what do you need for your research? And I said, man, if I had a German translator and that afternoon they had a German translation group call me, a guy by the name of Mitchell Gold. And I worked closely with Mitchell, and what we did was he dealt with all of the German, and I did the Hebrew, and so together we put this out. So I want to touch the next station is the reason I know a lot of the details that made it into the Moses Scroll is because of details in this work. Yeah, go ahead.
Excellent. Just before you do that, just to further what you just said, and again, just to say thank you to Dave and Patty for doing that, because it is an imperative tool in the study of this topic. I read it again yesterday for the second time.
Oh, good.
And it is a reasonably quick read. It's only 40 odd pages, I think. And there's a lot of really interesting information there. We're going to be touching on some of that, but I just wanted to say, for those who are wanting to get a copy of this, it is now available in a Kindle version. That's right now.
That's right. Yeah, you can get it in paperback or Kindle on Amazon. We'll have the links in the description of the video so people can do it. Now, what we have here, and this kicks us off tonight. We'll be going between this book, the accounts of Hermann Goethe, and the letters that I'm calling the Leipzig Letters. So here he begins. On the 30th of June of this year, I was visited by the famed antiquarian and bookseller M. Shapira from Jerusalem, agent of the British Museum, German subject since 1882. During my stay in Jerusalem in the spring and summer of 1881, I had made his personal acquaintance. Interest in the then not yet securely read Salom inscription led him many times to me, and I visited him repeatedly at his shop on Christian Street. So the two became friends the year prior. So whenever Shapira shows up at Strock's office and Strock turns him away, he goes to Leipzig. And he shows up on the doorstep of Hermann Goethe's office.
Hermann Goethe. Yeah. So just remind us, where is Strock again? Where is
he's in Berlin. He's in Berlin.
So he's gone from Berlin to Leipzig. How far away are these two? From the city to the town of Leipzig.
You know, I don't know. I don't know the distance. We can easily look that up.
Been there.
I don't remember. Yeah, exactly.
People can look that up, but off he goes to Leipzig. They stay where? This is one of your favorite topics. Where do they stay? Where does Shapira set himself up?
Shapira checks into what is called the Hotel Hauffe in Leipzig.
Where is it, Ross?
And listen, now, I found this out. I didn't know. I'm learning German now, but I wanted to look up, where is the Hotel Hauffe? Is it still there? Because, again, the Tylers and I went to Germany, and we wanted to go to the hotel. Well, it was bombed and destroyed in the Second World War period, but it was located at a place in German at the corner of Rossstrasse and Rossplatz, which means Ross Place and Ross Street. Now listen, Jono, if that is not some kind of divine providential
why can't it be
Jono
Place and Ross Street? There's got to be some sort of there's got to be a Jono Lane there somewhere or something.
I tell you what, we'll look for it, because you're probably right. There's got to be, maybe so. But this is so interesting, and when I saw that, I said, this is a sign. It's a providential that this. Here they are meeting at Ross and Ross. Where are you staying at, Shapira? Meet me at Ross and Ross. I'll have the scroll there. So
that is so
there you go.
Cool. Now, just to remind everyone as well.
Cool.
It is an overview of this is in chapter 5 of the Moses Scroll. Once again, hardcover, paperback, Kindle. You can get it straight away if you don't have it already. And there is now an audio version of the same.
That's right.
So an overview of chapter 5, but there's an enormous amount of information that Ross is going to unpack for us today. Maybe we can do all of this in one show. If not, we're going to try.
We're going to try. But look, we have, because of our good Yakad members, I just got a message in the chat here. It's 190 kilometers from Leipzig to Berlin, 118 miles. So he probably took a train and ultimate, yep. So, and by the way, this is horse and buggy time too. So at some point he catches flags down a horse carriage and rides into the hotel at Ross and Ross. I'm ready.
Is Goethe expecting him, or does he just show up? I mean, has he written ahead?
No.
He hasn't written it. He just rocks on up and says hi.
He shows up, and what happens is he shows up and he tells him this story, and he's very convincing. And now remember, Goethe is not opposed to. He and Shapira are very close friends, and the fact that they work together to crack the code of the Salom inscription, an achievement for which Goethe is credited, Shapira is not, other than the fact that now we know, because of some research that I've pulled forward, that Goethe does recognize Shapira's studious behaviors and his achievements. So one thing is that Goethe says that he wasn't expecting him. He admits that in the Fragments of a Leather Manuscript, but he says, I want you to see this manuscript. And remember, one of the things that Goethe says is that when he would go to Shapira's shop, one of the things that he was looking at is old manuscripts. Shapira is known as a purveyor of very old, authentic manuscripts. Now, he gets real excited, and Goethe says, I'm going to go back with you to the hotel to look at it. We don't get a lot of we don't know why. Maybe he says, don't pull that out here. Let's go to your hotel. I'm knocking off work anyway. So they leave the university, they go to the hotel.
Ross. This is my point.
He does.
Shapira arrives unannounced. Goethe looks at this. He's very excited about it. He drops everything, and he contacts whom to help him?
Well, once he gets, let me tell this, before he contacts anyone, he gets to the hotel. Shapira lays the manuscript strips. There are 16 leather strips out before him, and he immediately believes that this is authentic. Now, he wants to contact some help, because what Shapira does is Shapira said, listen, I want several capable scholars to look at this, make an assessment of it, and publish it, basically weigh in on the possibility, the potential authenticity. What do you think? Is it? And Goethe's looking at it, and he says, how quickly do you need this? He said, pretty quickly, because I want to sell this thing. I want to get it, into the right hands and let people see if it's authentic. If it is, I'm going to sell it. Goethe says it's to study this, absolutely give it the time and effort that it deserves. I don't know. Can we take a week? He said, okay, all right, maybe a week. Now, his friend and colleague is a man by the name of Edward Meyer. Edward Meyer is a brilliant historian, fluent in all the classical ancient languages. He can't get a hold of him because he's out of town the 30th of June. So he gets him the next day. He goes by, Goethe goes by his place and says, you got to see this. Shapira has what I think is an ancient manuscript. He's saying it's an early version, if not the authentic version, of Moses' Torah. Now,
okay. So now he rocks up, and these boys are buzzing, like they're very, very excited about it, and that excitement only grows. We'll talk about that. But one thing that I noticed, Ross, is that the endorsement of Dr. Schroeder carried little weight, or so it seemed, with Strack, and yet with Goethe, this really does mean something, and that information is
that's right.
Confirmed to him by Dr. Carlo Landberg. Is that right?
That's true.
Why?
Yep.
Have you speculated on that? Why did it seemingly have carry no weight with Strack, and yet it did with Goethe?
Strack seems to be really connected to Schlottmann. I think there might be an exchange of, maybe letters back and forth. Hey, Shapira's here. Shapira's coming. I got this letter, May the 9th. He said he's coming. I think Schlottmann had heavy influence on Strack. Remember, they're part of the same evangelical go out in the world and save the Jew club.
Yeah.
And the Jews for Jesus in the ancient or the old time Jews for Jesus. And so he tells him he's coming, and I think he's probably coached. Look, just don't even bother. I'm telling you, do not want to get tied up with Shapira. Remember the Moabitica thing, right? So he pushes him off. Now, but Goethe doesn't have that negative experience. He knows of a Shapira who is a brilliant scholar, of someone who was very influential and helpful with the whole Siloam inscription, and he loves going in his shop to see his old manuscripts. So he, like you said, he records, by the way, in the manuscript, the Fragments of a Leather manuscript, he, as you said, he says that he was told a couple of things, one of which is that Schroeder believes it's authentic. He marks that. Now, by the way, later in the story, Schroeder also, who is a very big proponent of the authenticity early on, guess what? He loses his courage. He's going to be another example of one of these weak scholars who will not stand up to their peers. And so we see that. But what happens is when Goethe tells Meyer, hey, listen, we've got Shapira here. He's at the Hotel Hauffe. You have to come see it. And that's what he tells him. When Meyer writes a letter later. We have copies of this. Is one of our Leipzig letters. He writes a letter later and says, Meyer says to a guy by the name of George Ebers, he said, I laughed at Shapira when he told me that Shapira had an ancient manuscript of a Mosaic document discovered in a cave by the Dead Sea. He said he laughed until he shows up on the 1st of July, Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
He shows up at the Hotel Hauffe, and this is what he says. In his letter to Ebers, he says that we were utterly certain of the authenticity of the manuscript. So they become absolutely blown away by this thing. They immediately set up, I'm going to go through a couple of facts here and you jump in, but they immediately set up a workstation in the Hotel Hauffe in Shapira's room. They divvy up the manuscripts. Because of this book, we know which scholar took which manuscript strips, and we know exactly what they. I have their transcriptions. In fact, that's on my academia page.
So they've rearranged the furniture to take advantage of the light to really examine it as best that they can, and they experiment with different ways to. And we spoke about this in previous programs. Different little scientific experiments, if you like. How best are we to read the text, because it only becomes apparent when we wet it, and only for a brief period of time. So it's a painstaking process, and they decide to consult an expert on the matter as to not cause damage to the document. Who do they speak to?
They talked to a guy by the name of Dr. Franz Hoffmann, and Hoffmann comes in really early, before they really get to work. That early part of that first week of July, they get to him, they tell him the story, he comes in, and he does several tests, basically what he could do at that time. And what I remember, I have all the information that was published on this, but basically what he says is he found nothing suspicious. In fact, in the Moses Cross, say Dr. Hoffmann recommended testing the blackened substance on the back of the fragments at a later time. But before he left, and sensing Goethe and Meyer's excitement about the manuscript, he informed them that in his examination, he found nothing suspicious. Okay, now, if they had heard from Dr. Hoffmann, who is, I've looked him up and done research on him, brilliant scientist of his day, if he found nothing suspicious, now can you imagine? Now they're thinking, oh my God, it's past its first hurdle. So Meyer writes another guy by the name of Adolf Ehrman. Now, by the way, all these guys are young, Jono. Just so you know, Goethe is 34 years old, but he's already established as a brilliant up-and-coming scholar. In fact, the next year, and there's a reason for this, the next year he gets his full professorship. Edward Meyer, same thing. Get this, the next year after this, he gets his full professorship. Adolf Ehrman, young guy. Next year, he gets his full professorship. All of them are awarded the next year of their life, but so they contact Adolf Ehrman, who, by the way, happens to be, in history, one of the greatest Egyptologists of all time. But all these guys know all the biblical languages because they're brilliant German scholars. So they send a telegram.
Yeah.
Can I do the telegram?
No, I was just going to say before you get to the telegram, it's just that and I'm sure you feel the same way. You can relate to the buzz that's going on.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
You really can, right? Because I feel this, on a weekly basis. You and I have been studying this document for 4 years now, and it doesn't let up. The story always reveals something a little bit further. You're just doing an exceptional job at uncovering these little pieces of the puzzle that fit together and makes it all the more exciting. And as we investigate the text, we discover more and more things, whether within the text or things that are added to the text later in the Pentateuch, it's very, very telling. And again,
Absolutely.
it presents itself as another piece of the puzzle. It's always very exciting. So there's a real buzz that you can relate to in the examination of the document. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to get. We want people to feel a little bit of the excitement that's going on in the room, in Shapira's room in the Hotel Hauffe. And so Ed Meyer, by the way, we have the actual telegram that he sent to this Adolf Ehrman, and he basically says, you got to come to the Hotel Hauffe as quickly as you can. Shapira is here from Jerusalem with what we believe is an authentic ancient manuscript older than anything you've ever seen. And Adolf Ehrman says, this is the English translation of his telegram that we have. He says, Dr. Ed Meyer in Leipzig, Munzgasse 18, the English says, coming Tuesday morning to cool off Shapira. Like he's like, come on, guys, you can't believe it. Remember, when Goethe tells Meyer, you have to come see, it's ancient, it's authentic, he goes, yeah, right. They send a telegram to Adolf Ehrman, he giggles too. He thinks it's fake too. So the next morning, Adolf Ehrman shows up. And guess what he says? He says, this is what Meyer, by the way, is writing.
After examination of the text. Go ahead.
That's right. He comes into the hotel room. He's ready to cool Shapira off. He thinks that his buddies have been tricked or swindled by this Palestinian Jew. And I'm using Palestinian as the Ottoman term. Understand this isn't a political term for our viewers. But anyway, here's what I wrote in the Moses Scroll. As promised in the telegram, Adolf Ehrman arrives at the Hotel Hauffe on Wednesday, 3 July, 1883. Goethe and Meyer showed the scroll fragments to Ehrman, and then this is Ehrman, his reaction. According to Meyer, writes this letter. He says, Ehrman fell into archaeological delight and declared that he would eat all of the strips if they were not genuine. Now, he knows, by the way, I mean, again, Ehrman is trained in ancient documents. He's worked with ancient papyrus and Egyptian manuscripts and all these things. But here he is looking at a leather strip, and he said, if those things aren't real, I'll eat them. So, we're rolling. This is now all of these strips. What they determine, let me give a little bit of the background on what they determine. By the way, people who have written on this subject in the past who haven't studied Goethe's work, again, if we didn't have this English, I would not have known much of the detail, but he describes, that there are 16 leather strips. He talks about the details. How big are the strips? How many of 2 columns, how many of 3, how many of 4, how many single columns, and so forth. And what we read about in this work is how they divided the strips up, and they say it looks like we have 2 almost identical manuscripts. And he describes as, when he gets into the size of the manuscripts, he even tells that they're roughly 11 feet long, right? 2 manuscripts, 21 columns of text each. For our viewers, the size of this document is roughly the size in your Bible of, say, the book of Hosea. That's about how much text it is. Jono and I have done testing. It takes about 20 minutes to read the entire manuscript from front to end.
Roundabouts, yeah.
Now, So now they're working on it.
So they're working on it, and they're very, very excited, and they realize that they need to speak to the old school, if you like. And it says that they quickly wrote a detailed description of the manuscript and dispatched it to 3 of the most distinguished scholars. Ross, who are these 3 distinguished scholars? And not only that, it says they also knew that they would need to prepare Carl Richard Lepsius of the Royal Library at Berlin. These are the guys, these are the gatekeepers, if you like.
That's right.
Who are the 3? And let's talk about Lepsius as well.
Yeah, so the three guys are Noldecki, Dillman, and Sakow. These guys are cream of the crop, top, the old school, the guard. These are the guys in Berlin that if anything that any official word related to the Bible coming out of Germany would have to go through these guys. So what they decided, as you said, they wanted to write, here's what we think. We think it's authentic. Here's what we know. This is some rough details. We'll send more later. And then Ehrman, who is going to prove to be the inside man. None of these, they kind of form this, it's not a plot. Plot sounds like it's a negative connotation. They form a plan, and Ehrman is going to be the inside man. He's going to go to Berlin and try to kind of grease the skids, as we say, for what they know is going to ultimately have to be, and that's going to have to be an approval of Berlin, of the old school. Yeah,
it's kind of like, and this might be a wanting illustration too, but it's kind of like two political parties trying to find commonality with which they can move forward. It's a little bit like that, it would appear. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so what happens is Ehrman and the boys in the hotel. So in the Hotel Hauffe in Leipzig, you've got Shapira. They're in his room, and you've got basically Hermann Goethe, Edward Meyer. Adolf Ehrman is there for the full day, at least Wednesday, and then he takes off with the mission to convince a guy by the name of Richard Lepsius that this is an authentic ancient document, and Lepsius is sort of the keeper of the Berlin Library, and he's the old guy. You have to get him. The thought is that if you can convince Lepsius will hold some sway over these other scholars, Dillman, Sakow, and Noldecki. So that's the thought. But there's this caveat that he always says in his letters. The reason we know this is because we have the Leipzig Letters. All of these letters are behind the scenes. By the way, we were first given a copy of the what I call Leipzig Letters from Matthew Hamilton. And Tabor and I were working on these. I translated them. They told us all sorts of behind-the-scenes stuff. I then took these letters, and the Tylers got me back with Mitchell, and we polished these up, and got really good translation of these letters as a kind of a confirmation of an initial translation deal. So, the caveat, though, is Ehrman always says, we know how Lepsius is. By that, he means, and he says this, the old guy, Lepsius, is not really bold in the face of these other scholars. Everybody knows people like this. You know, as long as he feels like he can win, he's got a little courage. But if there's any resistance, he's going to shut down and he's going to side with the stronger voice. So the problem is Lepsius tells Ehrman, don't tell anybody else about this. Listen, we'll schedule a meeting. We'll bring him in. Now, Ehrman has to play stupid because he knows that the boys have already written Dillman, Sakow, and Noldecki. So he's like, okay, I'll keep it quiet. Now, you got the whole thing is getting crazy. Ehrman's got to play damage control. So he writes Meyer, and he goes, listen, don't tell Lepsius that we told the three boys that everything has to be secret. Lepsius doesn't want them to know about it. So play stupid. And so there's this, it's a back and forth of these letters that tell the behind the scenes story.
So a couple of things. Why does Lepsius want to keep it in the bag? Is it because he wants to control the narrative, or for what reason does he want to shut it down? Because it's not that he wants to shut it down completely. It seems like he wants to bottleneck the information through his channels. Is that what's going on?
I think here's my take on it from spending countless hours on this stuff. It appears to me that Lepsius is favorable to Shapira, and he's become convinced that this could very well be authentic. but he knows that there is a prejudice against Shapira a priori. In other words, he knows that if you say Shapira has a manuscript, the other Germans in the positions of authority will say it's fake rather than give him a chance. So, and in fact, we have language that basically says this. So I think he wants to allow the manuscript to stand on its own legs and not give them too much before the meeting, and he's working on scheduling the meeting. But what he tells the boys back in Leipzig, you need to be ready for this meeting. You need to give us the information that we need. Tell us about the manuscript. That way, when we all come together, we've got a heads up on it, and so it's a big plan. Meanwhile, there's a back and forth, telegrams, letters between Ehrman and Meyer in particular. And the reason it's Ehrman and Meyer is because Goethe is busy. Goethe is busy, as is Meyer, but I think Goethe is maybe less approachable. I don't know. Meyer and Ehrman could be better friends, but that's what we have is that communication chain there. Okay. Now,
by the way,
yep.
Lepsius, just for people, he's worth looking up. Just look up the wiki on Lepsius. There's a really nice summary of who he was. He's a fascinating guy, isn't he, Ross? And
absolutely.
And he is made famous for various reasons, but one of them, of course, is coining the phrase "the Book of the Dead."
Right.
And the Book of the Dead is an Egyptian.
That's right. Everybody's heard of the Book of the Dead, but that's the phrase he came up with. Yeah.
And the reason why is because for those who are fans of the horror genre, Evil Dead uses that as a stage to bounce from those movies. Very kind of scary, very funny. If you haven't seen it, I don't recommend that viewers of our show go and see it. But it really is funny. Anyway, but Lepsius coins that, and it's a collection of magic spells, if you like, from ancient Egypt that enables one to transition into the underworld, if you like. Fascinating. But Lepsius, very interesting guy.
Yeah, and Lepsius is a brilliant... By the way, all of the names that we're naming here, this is the cream of the crop in European scholarship at the time. Including Strock. I don't mean to insinuate that Strock is not a top scholar. If you look up Hermann Strock, I cannot tell you how many times I run into his name as one of the top scholars of the 19th century. So all of these guys, Sachau, Dillman, all of these,
I still use
every one of these.
What is it, Keel and Dillman commentary here? Probably on a weekly basis. Grab one of those off the shelf.
Yep, that's right. So again, Ehrman has the tough job. He has to play stupid, and when I mean stupid, I mean he has to play as if he's not in on the authenticity gang. He's got to, but he's been convinced he's not doing anything wrong. He has become convinced. So here's what they know. They feel, they being the Leipzig gang, they believe that if they could just get these people to give the manuscript a fair shot, but they also know that that because of Shapira's association with it, that's going to be tough. And Lepsius keeps telling them, you can't let anybody else know. Well, by this time, the cat is, as the proverbial cat is out of the bag. Everybody knows what's going on in Leipzig, but get this. Lepsius doesn't know that everybody knows. So every time he meets with Ehrman, he's like, listen, don't you tell these guys about it. So they're prompt. So here is an example that I wrote about. It says, you have probably not yet written Ebers, said Ehrman, but if you do, just add openly that he is supposed to pretend ignorance. He knows Lepsius's peculiarities. I'll go to Schrader. So they're like, these letters are saying, we have to maintain the charade that no one knows. But he says, but rest assured, Lepsius is with us if he doesn't lose courage in the meeting. But see, they know that that's contingent. If Lepsius feels like they did something around his back and told the other guys they lost him. So there's this, it would make a great movie scene at least.
Wouldn't it though? It really would. Yeah.
A couple of things here. One of the things that I love about Ehrman, he's keeping the boys in Leipzig informed. And he says, he's telling Ehrman, okay, I talked to this scholar. Meanwhile, they're full blown. They're telling all the scholars because they're looking for more allies, even though Lepsius says, don't tell a soul. You ever get this where somebody goes, listen, I'm going to tell you a secret, but you can't tell anybody.
Don't tell
and you're
anybody.
Like, okay, tell me. And that's how it goes. And next thing you know, everybody knows. Yeah. So he says this in a letter dated the 7th of July. Schrader will examine the matter seriously. On the whole, as far as I can judge, it's not nice, decidedly below par. My main hope is Lepsius, but he's afraid and can easily be frightened. You know how he is. So again, all of this is going on, and the boys in Leipzig finish off the week believing that this is authentic. So by the end of the week, they have transcribed as best they can. Look, first of all, you're dealing with 16 leather strips that are difficult to read. We've already discussed in other programs the manner in which, using spirits brushed on with a camel hair brush, they're able to bring so they're holding it just like this in the light of the window at the Hotel Hauffe and with lighting from the 1800s. They're trying to do the best they can. They really only have 4 good days, working a solid 8 hours, and they've split the document in half. Yep. I see you reading. What are you looking at?
Yeah, I just realized Dielich. Dielich is the commentary that I pull off the shelf, and here they talk about him. Here was this. He went on to relate that they had learned from Shapira about the provenance of the strips and how it had been rejected a few years earlier by Schlotman and old Dielich. Yeah, that's right. How Shapira had set it aside. Okay, so there is this struggle behind the scenes prior to this meeting, and these two parties, you have your allies and you have your opponents. The opponents seems to be always the case, Ross, that the opponents have not seen it, they haven't read it, they have not studied it yet.
Right.
But the meeting happens, and there is something that's said by Ehrman?
Now, don't do the meeting yet. Don't do the meeting yet.
All right.
If you're, let's go let's insert one point before the meeting, because between the close of the week, now what we know is we know so much detail about this week in Leipzig. On Friday, the end of the week, because Shapira's about to go to Berlin. Remember, the plan is they know that there's going to be a 10 July meeting in Berlin at the home of Lepsius now. That's already established. But they've got to get their ducks in a row. And Edward Meyer is writing a guy by the name of George Ebers. These guys, Meyer and Goethe and Ehrman, are young. And I get from my research, I find out that Ebers is probably in his 50s. He's an older scholar. He is the mentor of young Edward Meyer. And so Meyer's writing him, telling him, you would not believe what we've got here in Leipzig. And he's telling him details about it. Now, here are a couple of the things he points out. He tells George Ebers that the content of these manuscript strips is glorious, I'm quoting, an endorsement of criticism that could not be more grand. He has
just
explain
that sentence for everyone. Endorsement of criticism. Just explain that.
He is saying basically the scholars of the period in the 1800s had already begun to work on a historical critical approach to the text. They had already established the fact in their minds that the Torah as we have it, the Pentateuch, was not written by Moses or at his time. And what he says, Meyer says, this thing proves it in ways that will blow your mind. Kind of like the title of your talk that's so popular. And he says, he writes him back and he says, be careful. In other words, when Ebers writes Meyer back, he says this about Schlottmann. As a burned child, Schlottmann naturally shies away from fire, even if it's not at all and could only be fire. It's the same with other colleagues, because even in this heat, they get cold when they think of Schlottmann's fate. He's telling him, be careful when you go forward with this. The older scholars telling young Edward Meyer, because he says, remember, Schlottmann got burned with Shapira. So it's sort of a caution. He's saying, I want to believe with you. I'm excited. It sounds great. And he even says, listen, he has faith in Goethe. He said, if Goethe thinks it's real, then I'm pretty convinced it probably is.
Sure.
Now, here's a quote that I love. Talking about Schlottmann and how these scholars lose their courage. He says, the Moabitica are scarecrows which keep clever sparrows away from good fruits, if they are such. So he's saying that this Moabitica scandal has served as if it's a scarecrow, scaring these scholars away from what could potentially be nice garden treats. In other words, you're telling me that you have a manuscript that could very well be authentic, but the Moabitica is like a scarecrow. So, now we're at the point where the meeting is about to take place in Berlin, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in if you have a question.
Well, I'm just reading further the letter from George Ebert to Edward Meyer.
Yeah.
And I think this is good. It is no art to declare suspicious things wrong, but it takes courage. It takes courage and certain knowledge to publicly declare that what is tainted with the smell of the fake, meaning the Moabitica, is still genuine. Good luck, he says.
That's right.
Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's encouraging. He wants to be encouraging because he has confidence in these young scholars. But look, this can be something that destroys a career. If you have the courage to go against the scholarly consensus of your day, this school, if you will, the academy, will crush you. And you know, when I read that Idan Dershowitz, the first time I had a conversation with him, I told him in writing and then on a phone call, I said, man, I want to tell you, I appreciate that you had the courage to stand up. And he told me, and he says this in several things that he's written and spoken, he says that he was warned by people, don't push this Shapira thing. Don't, oh yeah. Yeah.
And you know
and
what?
So
Isn't it?
The fact that he had courage, I even gave him this quote from Ebers. I wrote to him and I said, I gave him this quote and I said, this is applicable to you in your time. And he said, you have no idea, Yeah.
It really is fascinating. And what you're telling me is that, so Ed Meyer, Goethe, Ehrman, all of these guys a year later become professors in that field, almost as if, and I don't know this, I'm just speculating, almost as if it was sort of offered to them under the table. Toe the line, declare this a forgery, and we'll get there eventually, and we will reward you with a fast track in your career. Not only that, but Lepsius, who we were just talking about, he's dead. 1 year later, the guy's gone.
Yeah.
He's nowhere. And I'm not suggesting any foul play. The guy was old, but it's just interesting how quickly things change. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the boys in Leipzig, again, they're still in Leipzig. Ehrman is back in Berlin. The meeting notice goes out on the 10th of July. Now, I will tell people this. For the Yakad group, I will upload a picture that I'll show you in a little while. But here's something that I found after the publication of the book. I found a handwritten letter online from Lepsius to Ehrman saying that he agreed with him, that it was authentic. He agreed with his position. But what happens is Richard Lepsius's home becomes the location for a meeting on the 10th of July. Shapira goes to Berlin with the manuscripts. They take the manuscript strips from him into a meeting, and he stays in an anteroom. He's outside in the lobby or whatever, in the den, and the boys go into a room and shut the door. You've got the top German scholars that we mentioned already. They're behind the closed doors, and Ehrman is the inside man. He's in there, and he tries. Now remember, these are older scholars. He's a young guy, and he tries to he's been coached. He's saying, well, look at this, we would expect for this word to be spelled without and the older scholars shut him down. And over the course of 90 minutes, he later recounts, Ehrman later writes a letter to Meyer, and he tells him about that meeting. He later gives an account that he became almost convinced in that room that he didn't have the, how did he put it? He said he didn't have the confidence in the authenticity that he had when he was with them in Leipzig, because the old guys they were prepared. And they said, no, this is not the way that word would be spelled, and they're just fact after fact after fact based on biblical Hebrew, what we know from the Masoretic text. And for instance, one of the things he even writes, he said, I don't even know what the old guy says. He's talking about Dillman, and he says, I couldn't quite, mumbles, but it was something about the commandment where it says, don't kill the soul of your brother. He says, this is not the way this would be presented. And, and they basically just, based on present German scholarship and the way that orthography, the way words are spelled and so forth, he couldn't win. And I don't know, he doesn't say, but it's almost as if they just quiet him. Like, be quiet. They're talking now. You just listen.
They're the wet blanket. They throw a wet blanket over the excitement that he's been so much enjoying over the last week, Ian and Meyer and Guter. And you say, and I like the way that he put this, he quickly discovers, as you say, that he's the only member of the fan club, and then he starts to feel the pressure being applied to him, or he starts to feel that wet blanket cooling him off, as it were. And the meeting lasted for only 90 minutes. During an hour and a half, one thing seemed obvious. The decision was made before the meeting even started. Elaborate on that. I mean, they've come in. Is that what you mean, that they've come in prepared? Yeah. Because they already have viewed a transcription of the translation?
It can't be real, Jono. It's Shapira's hook to it. So what they did, a priori, in their mind already, it's condemned as a forgery because you say Shapira, forgery. Shapira, a forger. A forgery is associated with Shapira because remember, this hadn't even been a decade, and the German government, for God's sake, has already spent money to buy all of these and been made the laughing stock of the world.
But that was Moabitica. That was pottery. Here's the thing, Ross. Do you think that they are that's a convenient reason to write it off, because they well know, and everybody knows, and Goethe knows, that Shapira is a supplier of hundreds of manuscripts that have been purchased in the Berlin Museum, in the British Museum.
Not like this one. But
here's the thing. The thing about this one is that it deviates from. There are significant differences from the canonical text to this text. There are serious, massive theological implications if this was to be given credibility. Therefore, do you get the feeling, because I certainly do, that the whole Moabitica thing was just a convenient crutch for them to lean on to reject the manuscript. Whereas really the true reason is that it just it's different to their canonical text. What's your feeling on that?
There's some of both. There's some of both. Clearly, I mean, we get some of the shot from Schlotman. It says this disagrees with our Bible. We get the same from Delitzsch, which you mentioned a moment ago. But let me tell you, do not underestimate this Moabitica affair as a reason to condemn before giving it a chance. And here's something in more innocence. No one had ever seen anything like this, Jono. It's first of all, the strips are 3 to 4 inches. They're narrow strips. They're written in Paleo. There's never been anything brought forward in Paleo Hebrew on leather that is purportedly ancient. There are markings on the text, interpuncts, words separating dots. No one has ever seen anything like this on leather. So they say, the scholars of the time, in their defense, it's unprecedented. And so in order for someone to look at that and say it's authentic, they just don't understand how this could even possibly be considered to be authentic. But there are several factors. But I just don't want people to underestimate the fact that there is some of this, and it's mentioned in the letters, the prejudice against Shapira. And again, Germany, look, if the world finds out that the Germans are going to buy an ancient relic from Shapira again, are you kidding me? Once burned, and this language is used in the letters, once burnt, you got me once, you won't get me again. Or as we say, that one was on you, that one was on me, this one's on you. I'm not going to fall for it again. So they, after 90 minutes, Shapira's out in the lobby, or in another part. He's not in the room with them. And they go out, and the accounts become mixed here. What we don't think was made very clear was exactly where they stood. Some accounts seem to indicate that Shapira is not given a direct answer on what they decided. There is at least one account where when they come out, probably Lepsius is the way I understood it, went to Shapira. Ehrman can't. See, Ehrman, he's got to kind of walk by and wink at him because he can't let the boys know that he's in on the authenticity thing. You see, it's all clandestine. So, but Lepsius basically, one account says that Shapira was offered a small amount of money, which the Germans will later claim they were just willing to spend a little bit of money because they were going to teach people how good a forger could do. I don't believe it, but
I don't believe that. That makes no sense whatsoever. So they do offer him. See, this is the thing. If you're going to go and look at, say, a new car or something like that, you're in the market for a car, or a house or whatever it might be, and the salesman happens upon you, and how can I help? Da 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 da. You're not going to express to him your excitement about this particular product. You want him to think that, I've got a few different options here, and I don't know really if this is authentic, and I could be interested. I'm just here out of curiosity, really. And I mean, you got to remember that time when this particular brand of vehicle had that motor problem. Have they fixed that? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not so excited about it. It could be that they've gone in not, even suspecting that Ehrman is knows more than he's letting on, or is part of the fan club, if you like. It's a possibility that they're just playing it cool in order to get a really good price on the document, with also the reservation of potential forgery, and also the significant reservation of the fact that it differs greatly from the canonical text. that they come out and they say, we don't like you, we don't like it, it's probably a forgery because the more Bidica and it differs from the, and so therefore, but you know what, we'll offer you this much. The very fact that they make an offer, it makes no sense, Ross. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tend to agree. I don't, if they did, it wasn't clear to Shapira. The only way I could say that there was an offer made was he could have thought, well, that's nothing compared to what, because he believes that it's worth a lot more. And we know from letters that he thinks that it's worth quite a bit. And we'll talk about that when we get to that. But what we do know is that when Ehrman talks to him later, they meet like in secret. Maybe I assume they planned before, Ehrman probably said, look, I can't come out and talk to you. Meet me at this address. Give us an hour after we break up, and then we'll meet, whatever time that is. But they do meet, and Ehrman tells the boys back in Leipzig about this meeting later in a letter, and he says, I couldn't tell him much. See, he's beat down now. He's beat down, and what he tells Shapira, he tells Meyer that he tells Shapira, is that wait until Goethe's publication comes out before you make a move. In other words, don't sell them yet. Hold on to them until till we get the answer from the boys in Leipzig.
Now, that publication doesn't come out for a couple of months, right? And we're going to get into what happens over those successive months. But it's interesting that what he's indicating. It sounds like, hey, don't do anything yet because Goethe's assessment of the manuscript is going to come out, and it sounds like that's going to be favorable and that's going to lend to the value of the document. That's the way it sounds. It doesn't really end up like that. We're going to talk about that later, but
let me read this quote.
Go ahead.
Let me to go with what you just said. This is from the Moses Scroll. It says Shapira. Not knowing exactly what he should and should not say. This is Ehrman. He simply advised Shapira to hold on to the manuscript until the publication, which I think is this, was out and the question was resolved. Shapira agreed and informed Ehrman that he would take the scroll to England. Perhaps the British would appreciate its value and buy it outright, basically. So he basically.
Well, the question becomes, Ross, and because I'm sure everyone's wondering this, do we know how much the Germans offered?
No, we don't. No, we don't. And we don't have a number. We don't have a number for what they offered, and we don't have a number of any number that Shapira gave them. And by the way, we're going to talk about this incredible number that comes out in the sources later, but I've got a surprise twist on that too. But let me kind of, as we wind down on this episode, let me say this. One of the things that happens is Ehrman is really sort of in a depressed state, it seems, after this meeting. I think he feels torn. He feels like he didn't represent team authenticity very well, and so he's reluctant to write back about the meeting. Now, he starts the letter. We know he starts the letter, and he writes a little bit about it, and then he takes a couple of days, and he writes again. Now, remember, the boys are used to getting feedback, like right away, telegrams, letters, and postcards, but there's silence. And then finally he tells them the news about how he lost courage in the room and couldn't win them over. And then on the 16th, Myers replies to Ehrman's letters. And among other things, he said to Ehrman that he and Goethe would be careful not to go too fiery. In other words, they were cautioned. They were cautioned by this final letter from Ehrman. I say final. After the meeting in Berlin, when he finally sends the letter, he says, "Look, I'm telling you, if you come out with a positive view of the scroll." Woo! You better be careful, boys. You better. And so Ehrman is written. Myers writes Ehrman, and he says, "Okay, we'll make sure that we don't go too fiery with our decision. But now let me put a little controversy into this story, because I believe this is what happens after spending many, many hours reading this material. Even so, some of this is speculation, but I think it's based on factual data. What we know is this: when this book is published, it doesn't say by Goethe and Meyer. It says by Goethe. Now, Goethe does tell how Meyer is involved in this, and he tells some of the story.
And he's very thankful for his involvement. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very complimentary, but he doesn't get into a lot of, none of this rhapsodic excitement in the room comes out in this. In fact, this ultimately, Jono, and we're going to get more into this later, but I'll tell you right now, if people run out and buy this, they're going to be, in a way, shocked after hearing this, that the decision is it's a forgery. What in the world happened? Do you know that after this 10 July meeting, I found a letter written by Goethe to Ehrman, and he asked him, I don't have his response, but he says, are you willing, I'm paraphrasing, to go on record and say what you really felt about the manuscript? When I put this out, are you going to have the courage to say you think it's authentic? And I don't know that he wrote him back, but I do know that when this is published, Meyer is not mentioned in it, and I mean on the cover as an author. But I will say one other thing is that Meyer, even afterwards, I have letters where he still believes that it's authentic.
Sure. And we will talk about this further, and this will perhaps come out in next week's program when he goes to London. Goethe does wait until after Ginsberg has finished and declares his conclusion, and Ginsberg does so after Gounod declares his conclusion in a very hasty manner, and it's as if they are all looking around, going, "What do you think? What do you think? What?" And you guys show hands. Oh, yeah, I want to protect my reputation and my career. All these are young guys. They do have a very bright career ahead of them, and stepping out of line with the powers that be could be really devastating.
Look, here's the thing. Which way is the wind blowing? Which way is the wind blowing? If I am going to make a decision one way or the other, is that going to help me or hurt me? Is it going to help my career or hurt my career? Is it going to hinder my career or is it going to advance my career? And that is a big, big question. And it is a big part of what's going on in the world today, even though there's a somewhat of a lull presently in the Shapira world. It was hot and heavy for a couple of years there. But here's what happened. People sided almost immediately on it's a forgery. Academia said it was a forgery. It is still a forgery. It was one then. It is one now. Blah, 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 blah. But here's what happened. And I need people to understand, there have been scholars since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular, which we're going to get to in a later episode, but I'll say it now. Once the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, there was a wind of courage that blew into academia, and you had guys like Menachem Mansour at Wisconsin. You had people who were leader of SBL in the 1950s who said, wait a minute, what about this? You have not only Menachem Mansour, but you have John Mark Allegro. He says it's authentic. Listen to what it says on the cover. I love this. The mystery of a 19th century discovery of a Dead Sea manuscript, a forgery, or the oldest Bible in the world. And I'm going to tell you now that I think it is the oldest Bible in the world. And I want to close my end of this discussion with one quote. We both know it. The sin of believing in a false document is not much greater than disbelieving the truth. The tendency of showing great scholarship by detecting a forgery is rather great in our age. This is from a letter written by Moses Shapira on the 28th of August, 1883. Yeah. And here's the deal. If someone says, well, you don't have the manuscript anyway, so therefore, ergo, it's a fake, it's a forgery, you can't prove that it's authentic. And I would say, you can't prove it's a forgery if all things be equal. But to say we don't have the manuscript, we don't have the physical manuscript yet. But mark my words, it's not because we're not looking, and there is a possibility that we're going to find some of these fragments and test this, and that would. But here's what we do have. We do have the manuscript, and we have 3 separate
3.5
transcriptions, 3.5, from some of the top Hebraist of the time, and there's a lot to go on there.
Quite
so
right.
I think that more and more scholars are beginning to have the courage to stand up and say, hey, the possibility is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What one other thing, but what we also have is we have quite a few scholars, well-known scholars to our audience today, who have not studied the manuscript, who have not spent the time looking at the facts, some of which I sent a copy of my book, and they didn't even read it. And you know what they say? I think it's a forgery. Well, how about you expose yourself to some of the information before you determine that it's a forgery? In fact, that was the advice of Christian David Ginsburg back in 1883 when he was dealing with scholars coming out of the woodworks to claim it was fake, and he said, hey, how about you read it first? Anyway.
Quite right. So there's a lot
of courage.
A lack of courage. And so we believe that Goethe began his book when he was absolutely convinced and very excited, concluded his book after the after he held his finger to the wind and decided which way it was going to go. And you can see in his book, and like I said, I read it again yesterday, pieces of both sides in his mind. Like he had to obviously kept part of the original documentation of the book, the excitement, the belief that it was an authentic document, and then presenting reasons why now he thinks it's forgery and all this sort of stuff. And so I'd like let me close with a quote, and this is from his book.
All right.
Near the end, as he's concluding, he says, "So old will the text be, it would be a precious gift for science, a non-canonical piece of writing, but older than that piece of the canon which corresponds to its contents, perhaps the original copy thereof.
Wow.
It is truly compelling to paint for oneself the tremendous consequences that this find, if it really were a find, would precipitate for Old Testament science. I leave that, though, to the enjoyment of the reader."
I love that quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote. We'll probably talk a little bit more about his book in the next episode. Next week, we're going to be in London. Is that right,
by
Ross?
the way,
is that what we're doing?
Yeah, but by the way, to your point, chronologically, we're going to pick this up throughout the rest of the episode. So, for instance, we are now, if we're going chronologically, the meeting in Berlin was the 10th of July, and then he goes to London, where we're going to join our faithful and happy, excited viewers next week. But so he's in Leipzig the first week of July. He's in Berlin the 10th of July. Then he goes to London. And what we'll do is we'll spend some time in London. And then when we get on the calendar, people now can download the calendar. I have the link to 1883. Once we get to the point, August 14th is when, in 1883, when when Goethe wrote the preface to his work. So, and then it was published the 31st of August, but it doesn't even, news of this publication, by the way, never reached England until September the 3rd. So, by the way, some would say that England is piggybacking off of what the Germans found, but they didn't know about it. as far as we can tell, they did not know the verdict. So we're gonna go to London. Who wants to join us in London next week?
I'm looking forward to that. That's what we're going to be doing next week. And so that is the program for today. We're going to head over to the Yachad now and have a little bit of Q&A, and you can join simply by clicking the join button underneath this video. So there is that. Oh, a little bit of news before we go. Of course, you and I are now talking about the possibility of the next Tanakh tour. We'll have further information most likely next week, but we're starting to plan that. Things are coming under control. We want to make sure, of course, the Tanakh tour security and safety is our highest priority. And so we've obviously postponed last year's tour, November. We're now looking at late February, early March. And so we'll have more to talk about perhaps next week. But there's a little bit of news for the viewers. If you would like to join us, we'll let you know how that's a possibility next week.
Yep. So everybody that's with us right now, we're gonna stay online. We're gonna talk and share some other thoughts. So, hey man, Jono, it's always great. Let's do this again next week. How about that?
Will do. See you later.
All right.